This is TWiT.
The Nvidia GeForce RTX 2070 review. You guys got an EVGA card in. What was the findings? And once Mr. Addison was done with the benchmarking and the weeping and the counseling and all the stuff that goes into a benchmarking session at PC Per. Well, actually, I guess technically he didn't need counseling this time, but how'd it go?
No, not this
because
time.
It was 2070 versus 1080. Where are you leaning at this point?
Yeah, because that's kind of where we've been seeing them fall, right? Usually the new generation, you go one rung up from the previous generation on that line, and that's kind of your starting point of where you'd kind of expect the performance to sit. That was the case here, and then some. We were seeing like probably 5 or 10% better from the 2070. That's on top of a GTX 1080. And that's just, testing various titles, just various current games, current game titles. We tested at 1440p and 4K. It's funny, even with this kind of a lower end card, you don't really need to, if you go down to 1080p, the card's just going to scream. So definitely playable with games with decent settings at 1440p, and you can even get upwards into the 4K range depending on what you're playing and where you have your settings setting. So the interesting point here is that of the prices that we've seen for the 2000 series Nvidia cards, they did this at their launch. They had Founders Edition cards, which were $100 or even $200 above what the standard price for the cards should be. But we haven't really seen any cards hit the standard prices from, for example, 2080 Ti's or 2080s. However, for the 2070, the first card we reviewed is this EVGA card. I believe it's a Black Edition 2070. Is actually selling for $500, which is
I was going to say
that's the price it was supposed to launch at, right?
No, I'm with you. I'm up on Newegg, like EVGA, Asus, MSI, Gigabytes, all have cards at $499.99.
Right.
There's a couple more expensive cards out there, but you can actually buy the cards at the price.
Yes, you can buy the cards at the price. That's good, right? It is still, you still have to take into consideration that, it's been a couple of years, and at that particular price point, we're still kind of getting this amount of performance, right? Because if you think back, the 1080, which is what we're comparing this card to, that went for around $500. So that part of it is kind of disappointing, but it is what it is. That's kind of the whole graphics card landscape right now, partially due to Bitcoin, and I guess it's mainly due to Bitcoin still. I don't know. It should be coming down. I don't understand why it's not by this point, because it's the profitability has come down on a lot of stuff. So there's not mobs of people just scraping up batches of graphics cards off the market and kind of driving prices up for everybody. At least not anymore, as far as I know. Either way, you have decent cards at decent performance levels at the price point of $500, and for the RTX cards in particular, even though it's all the way down, a few rungs down from the top of the line model, this card does still have the RTX cores. It does still have Turing. Granted, it's a smaller one. It will still be able to do ray tracing in some way, shape, or form once supported by titles that come out. So you still have those extra bells and whistles that you can't take advantage of yet necessarily, but they're there. So
right.
Between that little tidbit, the performance gain over a 1080, the price being reasonably close, I'd basically say, if you have a 1080 or even a 1080 Ti, don't run out and buy an RTX card. Not yet. If anything, give them a little more time to come down in price. But if you're in the market for a graphics card right now, and you're okay with this particular performance level, which is really not too shabby at all, then it's probably worth considering going this route, 2070 route versus going after a 1080. which would probably be close in price. But you wouldn't get those extra features that might give you a more enhanced experience, moving forward with some future titles.
I was gonna say, it's interesting to watch some of the. It's interesting to watch. Like, I'm up on Newegg, and I've been waiting to buy a card, and I need a card under 215 millimeters for a particular build, and the number of cards available has been literally in the last couple of weeks has started. There's now less than 6 cards available that are like a 1080, a 1070, or a 1070 Ti that are under 215 millimeters. The prices have dropped a bit, and I think certainly with some of the more obscure cards, I think they're finally running out of starting to run out of inventory, and it's going to be tough to find some of these cards soon, the previous generation, which I suppose is good. I mean, I'm just thrilled to see the GTX 1070 actually selling for the launch price. I just need one that's like 50 millimeters shorter.
Yeah. So I was happy to see that this particular card is a actual 2-slot card. Third-party card, because what we've been seeing from the 2080 Ti and the 2080s that have been coming out, they've been these 2 and 3 fan sort of monstrosities, if you will, that are like 2.5 to 3 slot width, which is just kind of up there, especially given that the power draws are similar to what we were seeing from cards in the previous generation, and you had 1080 Ti's that there were plenty of them that were not 2.5 slot cards, and we're still able to be very good cards, like a EVGA FTW3, for example. Triple fan card, decent size card, but still only 2 slots, right? So I'm glad to see 2 slots here. This card isn't too large, although they actually EVGA did extend the reference PCB a little bit, as you can see right there. The card design of the heatsink portion kind of extends another few inches past the tail end of the card, and that's just to help it with with cooling, and even overclocked. First of all, we saw decent clock rates. Most of these Turing GPUs, it looks like most of them just like to go up to 2 gigahertz, regardless of 2080 Ti all the way down to, in this case, 2070. It's just you have fewer cores that are going that fast, but all of these cards, generally speaking, seem to be comfortable pushing close to 2 gigahertz clock rates. But this particular card, because the power consumption is lower, it's only around 180 watts, I believe. It's like 170, 180. Temperature stayed around 60 C, maybe 65 C. So that's not the point where the card's going to start pulling back on you. So in other words, it just comfortably runs close to 2 gigahertz and probably just do it all day, really. So, good on it there. And yeah, I mean, and there's also this new, I forget the name of the Nvidia Scanner. That's their new kind of overclocking mechanism, like automatic overclocking mechanism that EVGA Precision X and MSI Afterburner and all those the different sort of third-party utilities are able to trigger this Nvidia Scanner mechanism. And I think you let it sit for somewhere around 10 minutes, and it comes back and it's kind of figured out its overclocking curves in an automatic fashion. And it gets you, actually these results that we were just showing on the screen, those were the result of the Nvidia Scanner. That's kind of all that Ken has been doing lately. You just kind of hit the overclock button and don't sit there and try to do a bunch of trial and error. I'm sure we could squeeze more out of the GPU doing that, but the Nvidia Scanner is pretty good about getting you close to the threshold, but not really pushing past it, because it's actually going to be a little more conservative over what you might get out of a manual overclocking session with trial and error, because it's doing a computational workload. It knows the answer to the math it's trying to do. So it does this math. If it gets the right answer, okay, now maybe I can push it a little higher. So that's the sort of thing where it'll be a little more sensitive, where even if like one bit goes the wrong way, then this thing is gonna, not come to the correct conclusion, and it's gonna back itself off a little bit from that point, just automatically, as far as the overclock goes, versus your typical manual overclock where you're only looking for graphical artifacts that make it all the way to the screen and, crashes and whatnot. You might actually push it a little bit further, but there could be other instances or different games that might actually cause that overclock to be unstable somewhere down the line. So I just think you're a little safer, maybe not safer, but just convenience-wise or stability-wise, just going with the Nvidia scanner and sticking with what it gives you. You might be able to get a few more percent out of it, but you're kind of diminishing returns on stability once you're kind of pushing the bleeding edge there. But yeah, decent GPUs for $500, which I know it's still kind of up there. I know we're missing the super budget stuff, but if you're really on the budget, I would imagine there's probably people starting to sell GPUs from the prior generation. And if you were really, really worried about budget, go for one of those. If you have a GPU that's several generations old and you're just trying to look for a stopgap.
GTX 1080s, they're down under $500. I'm trying to find like the least, it's, on the upside, at least you're going to be able to get a 1080 or a 1070 Ti for less than what you would be paying for a TX 2070 at this point.
Right.
But it's amazing to realize, it seems like the 1080 Ti's are kind of getting thin on inventory.
That's why my take on it is kind of like, it's only it's not that much difference cost wise going between those prior generation cards that perform equivalent to this card. They're actually a little bit behind it, right? Like 1080 is 5-10% behind this RTX 2070. So that's why I'm kind of leaning towards, my recommendation would be if you're in the market right now for a new GPU, you should probably consider these 2070s if that's your particular performance price point that you're after. It just kind of makes sense to go with the newer generation thing as opposed to the card been on the market for pushing a couple of years.